The sun was setting over the small apartment in the suburbs of São Paulo. Sara watched through the window as the last lights of the day painted the sky orange and red. At 32, she felt as if she was disappearing along with that light. Anyone who saw it from the outside would never imagine the storm that was brewing inside it. Have you ever felt completely empty, even when your life seemed full? Have you ever had the feeling that, despite being surrounded by people, something fundamental was missing? Sara had a good job as a nurse, friends who invited her to parties and dinners, and a family that, despite occasional conflicts, loved her. But there was a lingering emptiness, a black hole that seemed to suck out any lasting joy that tried to blossom in his heart. What no one knew was that night, Sara had made a decision that would change everything. But before we find out what that decision was, we need to go back in time a little to understand how Sara got here. Sara grew up in a Christian home in the interior of Minas Gerais. The daughter of a pastor and a Sunday school teacher, her childhood was filled with biblical stories and worship songs. At the age of 7, she already knew by heart the verses of Psalms chapter 100. Celebrate with joy to the Lord, all you inhabitants of the earth. Serve the Lord with joy and present yourselves to him with song. On Sunday mornings, Sara would wake up before everyone else, put on her favorite dress, and wait anxiously to go to church. She loved the moment of praise, when she closed her eyes and felt as if she could touch the sky with her fingertips. My Jesus, my Savior, there is none like you, she sang at the top of her little lungs, truly believing every word. Her mother, Dona Conceição, used to say that Sara had a heart of worship. Her father, Pastor Antonio, smiled proudly when his daughter offered to sing solos in children's services. Sara has a special calling, he told church members. She's going to do great things for the kingdom, and Sara believed. With the pure, unwavering faith that only children possess, she envisioned her future. She would be a missionary, perhaps, or a famous gospel singer who would lead thousands to worship God, or perhaps a doctor who would heal people in distant countries while sharing the gospel. At the age of 12, during a youth camp, Sara had what she called her first real encounter with God. During a moment of worship, he felt such a strong presence that he fell to his knees, crying. My whole being rejoices in you, Lord, he whispered, quoting Psalm chapter 92, verse 4, as tears streamed down his face. That night, he wrote in his journal in large underlined letters, I have given my life to Jesus today, forever. Adolescence arrived with its inevitable turbulence. At the age of 15, Sara's family moved to São Paulo after her father accepted the invitation to pastor a larger church. The transition was not easy. Suddenly, Sara was no longer the pastor's daughter that everyone knew and admired. She was just the country girl in a huge school where no one cared about her faith or how many verses she knew by heart. You're so hillbilly, Vanessa, the most popular girl in the class, said when Sara mentioned that she didn't watch certain TV shows because her parents wouldn't allow it. The laughter that followed burned in his ears for days. For the first time, Sara began to question, not the existence of God or his love, that was still solid in his heart, but he questioned his place in the world, the strictness of his parents' rules, the difference between his life and that of his new classmates. Why can't I go to Vanessa's party, Mom? It's just going to be a birthday, he once argued. Because there will be alcoholic beverages and worldly music, replied Dona Conceição firmly. Deuteronomy 6 teaches us to love the Lord with all our heart, soul, and strength. That means making choices that honor him. Sara swallowed her frustration. She loved God. She really did. But he began to wonder if loving God necessarily meant giving up experiences that seemed normal to all the other teenagers. In the silence of her room, she still sang the worship songs she had known since she was a child. My comfort, my strength, strong tower is the Lord. But now, at times, the words came out more like a cry for help than a statement of certainty. The first big crack in his faith came at the age of 17, when his best friend Lucas, also the son of a pastor and his confidant since moving to São Paulo, revealed that he no longer believed. What do you mean you don't believe it anymore? Asked Sara, feeling as if the ground was disappearing under her feet. Lucas shrugged, avoiding her gaze. I've been studying science, philosophy for a long time. There are many things that don't make sense, Sara, and I'm tired of pretending. But what about everything we experience, the camps, the answered prayers, coincidences, collective emotion? Our brains are hardwired to see patterns and meanings where none exist. That night, Sara cried herself to sleep, not just for the friend who seemed lost, but because her words had planted a seed of doubt that she didn't know how to uproot. At the age of 19, against the initial wishes of her parents who expected her to study theology, Sara entered nursing school. I can also serve God by taking care of people, he argued, and finally, they agreed. The college. Years were intense. Between classes, internships, and shifts, Sara barely had time to breathe, much less to attend services as regularly as before. Still, he maintained his personal devotion. Every morning before leaving for college, I read a verse and prayed quickly. It's not the same as before, Lord, but you know that my heart is yours, he whispered as he ran to catch the bus. It was during her internship in pediatric oncology that the second big crack appeared. Sara met Miguel, an 8-year-old boy with late-stage leukemia. With his big brown eyes and easy smile despite the pain, Miguel won her heart immediately. Do you believe in God, Aunt Sara? He asked one afternoon as she changed her medication. I believe, Miguel. Why? Because I pray every night to get well, but I don't think he's listening to me. Sara's heart tightened. He does, Miguel. Sometimes the answer takes a while or comes in a different way than we expect. My mother says that God works miracles. Have you seen any? Sara hesitated. He wanted to say yes, that he had seen many miracles. But in that moment, looking at that fragile child whose life was slipping away a little each day, the words stuck in his throat. I think the greatest miracle is love, Miguel. The love your mother has for you, the love the doctors and nurses have in caring for you, and the love of God that is present in all of this. Miguel seemed to consider her words for a moment, then smiled. It makes sense, but I still wanted the miracle of getting well. Me too, Miguel. So do I. Sara spent weeks praying intensely for Miguel. He fasted, cried out, reminded God of all the promises he knew. There is none like you, Lord. All power is in your hands. Please heal Miguel. But Miguel did not improve. On a cold July morning, Sara arrived at the hospital to find his bed empty. The little warrior had left during the night. That night, for the first time in her life, Sara cried out to God. Why? Why didn't he save him? He was just a child. My comfort, my strength? What comfort did Miguel have? What strength? The silence that followed his screams was deafening. At the age of 24, graduated and working in a private hospital, Sara met Rafael, a newly hired doctor. He had gentle eyes, a sense of humor that made her laugh even on the most difficult days, and a faith that, although different from her own, seemed genuine. I didn't grow up in the church like you, he explained during one of their first meetings. I found God as an adult, so I'm still learning. For Sara, who had been struggling with her own doubts and questions, Raphael's simple, practical faith was refreshing. He did not quote verses for every situation or judge people for their choices. Instead, he demonstrated his faith through small acts of kindness, buying coffee for exhausted nurses, sitting with lonely patients, donating part of his salary to humanitarian causes. I think Jesus was more interested in what we do than what we say, he once remarked when Sara asked why he rarely spoke about his faith. The relationship blossomed quickly. Within 6 months, they were engaged, planning a future together. Sara's parents, initially hesitant because Raphael did not attend their denomination, ended up giving in when they saw their daughter's happiness. He has a good heart, admitted Pastor Antonio, and he is willing to grow in faith. The wedding was simple but beautiful, in the church where Sara's father pastored. During the vows, Raphael promised, I will love you and God in that order for the rest of my life. Sara felt a pang of discomfort. Shouldn't God always come first? But he pushed the thought away. Was Raphael just being sincere? And wasn't that what mattered? The first years of marriage were happy. They established a routine that included morning devotees together, though shorter than Sara was used to, and attended church on Sundays, though not always all meetings. The third big crack came when they started arguing about having children. "I want our children to have the freedom to find their own spiritual path," Raphael said during a conversation about religious education. "What exactly do you mean by that?" asked Sara tensely. "I want to say that we are going to present them to God, of course, but without impositions, without that pressure that many children in the church feel." "Pressure? Do you think I was pressured?" Raphael hesitated, noticing the dangerous terrain. "That's not what I meant. I just think sometimes kids in church are forced to fake a faith they don't fully understand yet." The words hit Sara like a punch. Is that what he thought? That his childhood faith had been just a role play? "My faith has always been real," she said, her voice trembling. "Since I was little, I know, love. You are different. I'm just saying that I want our children to have space to question, to doubt if they need to. As if I hadn't questioned it. As if I had no doubts." The argument escalated, touching on wounds that Sara didn't even know she had. In the end, they both apologized, but something had changed. A subtle distance settled between them. In the following months, Sara began to notice other differences in their worldviews. Raphael saw no problem in watching certain movies or listening to music that she had been taught to avoid. He occasionally had a glass of wine with dinner. Small things, perhaps, but added together, they created the impression that they were on divergent paths. "There is none like you," Sara sang in the mornings, alone now in her devotionals while Raphael slept. "All power is in thy hands." But the words sounded hollow, as if he were reciting a long memorized poem whose meaning had been lost. At the age of 29, after months of unsuccessful attempts to get pregnant, Sara and Raphael sought medical help. The scans revealed that Sara had late-stage endometriosis, a condition that significantly reduced her chances of conceiving naturally. "It is still possible," the doctor explained, "but it will be difficult. We can try treatments, IVF." Sara listened to the explanations in a state of torpor. All I could think was, why would God allow this? Weren't all the other trials enough? That night, while Raphael was researching fertility treatments and clinics, Sara locked herself in the bathroom and cried silently. She remembered all the times she had imagined her future children, how she would teach them to love God, how she would sing them the same songs that her mother sang to her. "My Jesus, my Savior," he whispered between sobs. "Why does it seem that you are so far away?" The next few months were an emotional roller coaster, hormonal treatments that made her irritable and bloated, painful procedures, high hopes followed by crushing disappointments. Raphael was by her side every step of the way, holding her hand during appointments, comforting her after each negative test. But even her unwavering support couldn't fill the void growing inside her. "Maybe we should consider adoption," he suggested gently, after the third failed cycle of fertilization. "Not yet," Sara replied determinedly. "God will give us a son. He promised to be our comfort, our strength. He wouldn't abandon us like that." But as treatments continued to fail, Sara's faith, already weakened by years of small cracks, began to crumble completely. The fourth and biggest crack came when, after 2 years of trying, its last embryo failed to develop. "I'm sorry," the doctor said, her face compassionate. "We can try again in a few months if you want." In the car, heading home, Sara remained silent as Raphael drove, occasionally casting worried glances in her direction. "It's going to be okay, love," he said finally. "We have each other, and there are other ways to form a family." Sara did not answer. In his mind, he repeated the words he had sung so many times. "Nothing compares with the promises I have in you." What promises? The comfort ones I didn't feel, of strength that he didn't have, of miracles that never happened. When they got home, Sara went straight to her room, ignoring Raphael's attempts to talk. He took his Bible, the one he had received at the age of 12, with his name engraved in gold on the cover, pages marked and underlined with verses that used to mean so much. He opened to Psalm 96, one of his father's favorites. "For great is the Lord, and worthy to be praised, more fearsome than all the gods. For all the gods of the peoples are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. The words, once so comforting, now seemed distant, as if written in a language she no longer fully mastered. That night, Sara made a decision. It wouldn't be dramatic. It wouldn't announce it to anyone. But in his heart, he quietly decided to stop trying. Stop praying for miracles that didn't come. Stop singing praises that I no longer felt. Stop pretending that your faith was still intact. At 6:45 a.m., Sara's iPhone alarm went off with the tune Overture, a sequence of rising notes that she had chosen years ago because it sounded hopeful. Now, each note felt like a small accusation, reminding her of another day when she would need to don her carefully constructed mask. His arm emerged from the covers, groping the bedside table until he found the device and silenced it. For exactly 17 seconds, she had timed it once. Sara existed in a blessed limbo between sleep and mindfulness, a brief moment of peace before the memories and expectations of the day flooded her mind. And then, as always, reality returned. First, like a weight on the chest, then like a mist that seemed to envelop every thought. Another day to pretend. The room was partially lit by the light that seeped through the cracks in the blind, golden bands cutting through the dim light, highlighting dust particles that danced in the air. Raphael still slept beside her, his breathing deep and regular, his face relaxed in an expression of peace that Sara secretly envied. What would it be like, she often wondered, to wake up without this corrosive emptiness at the center of her being? With an almost inaudible sigh, Sara pulled aside the covers and sat on the edge of the bed. The cold floor under her bare feet provided a concrete sensation, anchored in physical reality, one of the few sensations she could still fully experience. The morning ritual had become, over the months, a choreography as meticulously rehearsed as a play. Every move was calculated, every facial expression practiced to perfection. In the bathroom, Sara turned on the shower and, while waiting for the water to heat up, stared at her reflection in the fogged mirror. Subtle but noticeable dark circles framed eyes that had lost their characteristic glow. Small lines of tension marked the corners of his mouth. A mouth that, in photos from just 5 years ago, smiled with a spontaneity that now seemed to belong to someone else. Sara touched her own face, as if to check if the person in the mirror was really her.
Who are you?
He whispered to his reflection, his words almost swallowed by the noise of running water. The shower offered 5 minutes of temporary relief. The hot water running down her body seemed momentarily to wash away not only the physical dirt, but also the feeling of disconnection that constantly accompanied her. It was one of the few moments of the day when Sara allowed herself to simply feel the temperature of the water, the texture of the soap, the smell of the lavender shampoo that Raphael had bought her for her wedding anniversary. But even this small refuge was brief. When she turned off the shower, the emptiness returned, as familiar now as her own skin. Dressing up was another performance exercise. The nurse's uniform, not the traditional white, but the navy blue of Santa Clara Hospital, with its logo embroidered in light blue over the left pocket, was like armor. Every button buttoned, every crease smooth, was a step toward becoming Nurse Sara. Competent, compassionate, unwavering. A version of herself that still functioned in the world, even when her inner self was collapsing. Her hair, still damp, was pulled back into a professional bun, without a strand out of place. Makeup, applied with surgical precision. Enough foundation to disguise pallor, concealer to camouflage dark circles, a touch of blush to simulate vitality, mascara to give the illusion of alertness. Nothing excessive, just enough that one would notice how exhausted she was, not just physically, but in her soul. When he emerged from the room, Raphael was already in the kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the apartment, a smell that, in better times, would have made her genuinely smile. Now it was just another sensory detail recorded and archived, without provoking real joy. "Good morning," Raphael said, looking over his shoulder as he stirred something on the stove. Her smile was warm, her brown eyes still full of that admiration that Sara did not understand how she could persist after 7 years of marriage, especially considering how much she had changed, how much she had become emotionally distant. "Good morning," she replied, forcing a smile she had practiced countless times in the mirror, lips curved just right, small wrinkles in the corners of the eyes to look genuine, head slightly tilted to suggest interest and affection, a masterpiece of emotional falsification that deceived everyone, except, perhaps, herself. Raphael placed a cup of coffee in front of her, prepared exactly as he liked it, with a touch of cinnamon and a spoonful of brown sugar, a small act of love that, instead of warming her, only intensified her guilt. How could he keep noticing these details, continuing to love her so intently when she could barely feel anything? "I made scrambled eggs with spinach," he said, placing a plate in front of him. "I know you have a long shift today. You need power." "Thank you," Sara replied, looking at the food that she knew should be appetizing, but that seemed just matter, meaningless substance, like everything else in your life lately. Raphael sat in front of him with his own coffee and avocado toast. He wore a faded gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his work-from-home uniform as a software developer. His dark hair was unkempt. A 2-day-old beard shadowed his face. There was a naturalness to him, an authenticity that Sara deeply envied. "12-hour duty today?" he asked, biting into his toast. "Yes," Sara replied, grateful for the predictable conversation about schedules and appointments. It was safe. It didn't require vulnerability or deep emotional connection. "I'll probably arrive after 8. I'll leave something ready for you to warm up," offered Raphael. "I was thinking of making that eggplant lasagna you like." "No need to bother," Sara said, the comment coming out colder and more distant than she intended. Seeing Raphael's slightly hurt expression, an almost imperceptible frown, a brief purse of the lips, she quickly added, "But it would be great, thank you." The silence that followed was dense with unspoken words, unasked questions, unexpressed concerns. Sara could feel Raphael's gaze studying her, looking for clues to what was going on inside her. She kept her eyes fixed on the coffee, watching the spirals of steam that rose from the cup as if they might contain some secret, some answer to the emptiness that consumed her. "Sara," he began, his tone indicating that he was about to start one of those conversations she had been avoiding for months. That gentle, concerned tone that always preceded questions like, "What's happening to you?" or "Why don't we talk like we used to?" "I need to go," she interrupted, standing up abruptly. The chair scratched the wooden floor, a screeching sound that seemed to underline the artificiality of her sudden haste. "Traffic on the marginal, you know how it is." Raphael nodded, resigned. An almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips before he forced an understanding smile. "Of course. Have a nice day. I love you. I love you too," she replied automatically, the words coming out with frightening ease, considering the emptiness she felt when she uttered them. It was like an echo of something that had once been true, but now sounded hollow, devoid of substance. Sara took her purse, quickly checked if she had everything, badge, wallet, keys, cell phone, and headed for the door. Each step took her away from the possibility of a real conversation, an authentic connection. Each step was simultaneously an escape and a defeat. In the elevator, alone, finally, Sara allowed her mask to slip off for a moment. His shoulders slumped, abandoning the upright, confident posture he had maintained in public. His breathing, once controlled and regular, became irregular, almost panting. The elevator mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, dull eyes that seemed to look through things. Instead of at them, lines of tension around her mouth that no rehearsed smile could completely disguise, a pallor that makeup only partially camouflaged. "Are you okay, honey?" asked a voice next to her, startling her. Sara had not noticed when the elevator stopped on the 3rd floor, nor when Donna Sida, an elderly neighbor who had lived in the building for decades, entered. How long had you observed her in her moment of vulnerability? With the speed and precision that come from constant practice, Sara recomposed her expression, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, polite smile on lips. "Of course, Mrs. Sita. Just tired. Shifts, you know." The old woman studied her for a longer than comfortable moment, her age-faded blue eyes still surprisingly perceptive. "You in the health area sacrifice so much," she finally commented, apparently accepting Sarah's explanation. "God bless your work today." "Amen," Sara replied, the word coming out automatically, like a conditioned reflex, after years of religious upbringing. The same amen that he had pronounced thousands of times in services, Bible studies, family prayers. An amen that once carried conviction and was now just an empty sound, a meaningless syllable. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Sara said goodbye to Donna Sita with another rehearsed smile before heading to the underground parking lot. Her 3-year-old silver Honda Civic was parked in the 42nd slot, a number that, in better times, made her smile, reminding her of the answer to the meaning of life according to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a book Raphael had insisted she read during their courtship. Inside the car, with the doors locked and the certainty that no one could see her, Sara finally allowed herself a moment of brutal honesty. She rested her forehead on the steering wheel and breathed deeply, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to ruin her carefully applied makeup. "How long?" she whispered to herself, the words barely audible even in the silence of the car. "How long will I be able to keep this?" There was no answer, of course, only the silence of the empty parking lot and the distant hum of the ventilation system. Sara straightened up, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror to make sure her mask was still intact, and started the engine. Another day of performance had begun. The Professional Masks Santa Clara Hospital stood imposingly against the gray sky of that autumn morning. 12-story building in glass and concrete, its modern lines and gleaming facade proclaimed its position as one of the most respected medical centers in the South Zone of São Paulo. For patients and their families, the imposing structure inspired confidence. Here was a place of advanced science, of healing, of hope. For Sara, who parked her car in the area reserved for employees, the hospital had become both a refuge and a prison. A refuge because, between the aseptic walls and strict protocols, she knew exactly who she was supposed to be. Nurse Sara Mendez. Efficient, compassionate, professional. The mask was clear, well-defined, almost comfortable in its predictability. Here, at least, emptiness had a purpose. It allowed her to move among the suffering of others without being consumed by it, to perform painful procedures when necessary, to remain calm in emergencies. A prison because even there, where she felt most competent, emptiness followed her like a lingering shadow. Because increasingly the line between the necessary professional mask and the worrying emotional dissociation became blurred. Sara swiped her badge on the electronic reader at the entrance of employees. The green light flashed, and the glass doors slid silently, allowing her to enter. The air conditioning immediately enveloped her, that artificial cold characteristic of hospitals, neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, just institutional. "Good morning, Sara," greeted Patricia from the reception, a middle-aged woman with dyed blonde hair and a perpetually cheerful smile. She was, as always, impeccably made up and dressed, her pale blue uniform without a single wrinkle, a golden angel-shaped brooch pinned next to her badge. "Ready for another day of saving lives?" "Always," Sara replied with a rehearsed smile. Not too broad, it would look fake. Not too small, it would look disinterested. Just enough to look engaged and positive. It was the kind of comment she heard often, and that always made her uncomfortable. Nurses didn't save lives, at least not in the dramatic way that people imagined. They monitored, medicated, comforted, documented. They cleaned bodily fluids, turned patients to avoid bed sores, administered medications at the correct time, observed subtle signs of deterioration. It was essential work, but rarely heroic in the way others seemed to think. "You look tired," Patricia remarked, leaning over the reception counter. "Difficult night?" Sara adjusted her expression, adding a touch of liveliness that she didn't feel. Nothing that a good dose of caffeine can't solve, he replied with a forced lightness. How are things here today? Ah, the usual. Dr. Marcos has had that humor of his since he arrived. It seems that he had a problem with the new resident, and we have 3 new admissions in oncology. Sara nodded, absorbing the practical information that really mattered for her workday, as she walked away with a wave. I'd better hurry then. Have a good day, Patricia. In the women's locker room, the smell of hospital disinfectant mixed with the fragrances of perfumes and deodorants. Some nurses from the night shift were still there, changing their clothes and talking in low voices, exhausted after 12 hours of work. Sara greeted them with brief waves, heading to her locker, number 117, 3rd row. As she turned the small lock, inserting the combination 0712, Raphael's birthday, Sara heard a familiar voice behind her. So, how was the weekend? It was Louisa, a nurse from the same ward, with whom Sara shared many shifts. At 29, Louisa was the opposite of Sara in many ways. Outgoing, talkative, always ready to share details of her personal life, and equally eager to hear about others. In other circumstances, at another time in her life, Sara might have developed a close friendship with her. Now, Louisa represented just another person from whom she needed to hide her inner emptiness. Easy, Sara replied vaguely, opening her closet and putting away her bag. And yours? It was amazing, exclaimed Louisa, her brown eyes shining with genuine enthusiasm. She opened her own closet, 2 numbers after Sara's, and began to take out personal belongings, a hairbrush, deodorant, a small makeup case. I went to that new church that I told you about, remember? The Community of Renewed Grace? Wow, Sara, you needed to see it. The praise is incredible. The pastor has such an anointed word. I'm sure you would love it. Sara nodded, smiling politely. Louisa was a fervent evangelical, always enthusiastic about her church and constantly inviting Sara to visit her. In the early years of working together, when Sara was still trying to maintain social connections despite the growing emptiness, she had shared that she was also a Christian, the daughter of a pastor, by the way, a mistake that now forced her to maintain another facet of her daily performance. They have an impressive healing ministry, Louisa continued, apparently not noticing Sara's lack of enthusiasm. On Sunday, a lady who had been arthritis for 15 years was completely healed. He threw away the cane and began to dance at the altar. It was beautiful to see. It must have been, Sara muttered, closing her closet with a metallic click. There was a time when I would have been genuinely moved by such a story. Now, he felt only a tired skepticism. How many times in his youth had he witnessed miracle healings that he later, discovered were temporary, psychosomatic, or simply staged for the impressionable congregation? You should come with me one of these days, Louisa insisted, closing her own closet and adjusting the badge to her uniform. They have worship on Wednesday nights too. I know you don't work on Wednesdays. Maybe one day, Sara replied, as she always did. I'm so out of time. We always have time for what we prioritize, Louisa said with a smile that was intended to be gentle, but which Sara perceived as slightly accusatory. God has been talking to me a lot about priorities lately, about how we often say we don't have time for him, but we find time for Netflix, for social media, for, I suppose so, Sara murmured, interrupting what promised to be an impromptu sermon. He closed his locker tighter than necessary, the metallic sound echoing in the locker room. I'm going to check on my patients. See you later. Pulling away before Louisa could continue the conversation, Sara felt that familiar twinge of guilt. It wasn't Louisa's fault that her well-intentioned words sounded like stabs to Sara. It was no one's fault, except perhaps Sara herself, for no longer being able to connect with something that had been so fundamental to her identity. The morning shift went about his usual routine. Sara checked vital signs, administered medications, updated medical records, talked to patients. Its efficiency was admired by doctors and colleagues alike. Sara is a machine, Dr. Marcos, the chief oncologist, often said. I've never seen someone so organized. What no one realized was that this efficiency was their lifeline. While focusing on concrete tasks, procedures, and protocols, Sara could keep the void at bay. It was only in moments of pause, a quick coffee in the pantry, 5 minutes of sitting, resting my feet, that the feeling of being hollow inside came back with full force. Around noon, Sara was assigned to take care of a new patient, Donna Teresa, 72, recently diagnosed, with advanced pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was not good, a matter of months, perhaps weeks. "Good afternoon, Donna Teresa," Sara said as she entered the room, medical record in hand. "I'm Nurse Sara. I'm going to take care of you today." The elderly woman, thin and pale against the white sheets of the hospital, offered a surprisingly bright smile. "It's good to meet you, Sara. May God bless your hands today." Sara nodded, starting the routine procedures. He checked the venous access, checked the monitors, and noted the vital signs. All normal, considering the circumstances. "Are you comfortable? Do you feel any pain?" he asked professionally. "The physical pain is under control, thank God, and these wonderful remedies," replied Donna Teresa. "But there's a pain that no medicine can cure, right?" Sara stopped what she was doing, looking directly at the patient for the first time. There was something in Donna Teresa's eyes, a clarity, a perception that disconcerted her. "What kind of pain are you referring to?" he asked cautiously. "The pain of the soul," replied Donna Teresa simply. "The one you carry in your eyes, my daughter." Sara felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. How could this woman, who had just met her, see what neither her husband nor her parents nor her colleagues of years could see? "I think you're confusing things," Sara said, her professional voice returning like a shield. "I'm perfectly fine. Now, I need to check his medication." Donna Teresa didn't insist, but her gaze remained on Sara, not accusatory, just compassionate, as if she could see through all the layers of protection Sara had built up over the years. When she finished the procedures and was about to leave the room, Donna Teresa spoke again. "Do you know what I discovered after living 72 years in this world? That emptiness is also a place. Sometimes we need to inhabit it completely before we can get out of it." Sara stopped at the door with her back to the patient, unable to answer. After a moment, he simply left, closing the door softly behind him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. How could a complete stranger see so clearly what she was trying so desperately to hide? Sundays had become Sara's hardest days. Before, they were days of renewal, church in the morning, lunch at his parents' house, quiet afternoon with Raphael, sometimes a Bible study group in the evening. Now they were evasion exercises and elaborate excuses. "I won't be able to go to church today, Mom," Sara said on the phone that Sunday morning, 3 days after her meeting with Donna Teresa. "I left exhausted from the shift yesterday. I need to rest." On the other end of the line, Donna Conceição sighed. It was a familiar sound now, worry mixed with disappointment, but carefully controlled so as not to sound judgmental. "I understand, daughter. Really rest. But we miss you, you know. It's been almost a month since you came to a service." "I know, Mom. It's just a complicated phase at work. Soon it will get better. Your father has prepared a special message today on Psalms chapter 92. It is good to give thanks to the Lord and to sing praises to your name, O Most High. He'd like you to hear it." Sara closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pressure in her chest. "Maybe next Sunday. Are we at least going to see you at lunch?" asked Donna Conceição, hope evident in her voice. Sara hesitated. The idea of sitting at the table with his parents, holding superficial conversations while avoiding any mention of his spiritual life, seemed exhausting. But the alternative, staying at home with Raphael, facing the growing silence between them, was not much better. "Yes, we'll be there for lunch," he finally replied. After hanging up, Sara found Raphael in the kitchen preparing breakfast. He didn't ask about the call. He didn't need to. The pattern was predictable now. "Shall we have lunch at your parents' house?" he asked, placing a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. "Yes," Sara replied, playing with the food without actually eating. "But we don't go to church." Raphael nodded, sitting in front of him. "Sara, don't you think it would be good to talk about it?" "About what?" she asked, knowing perfectly well what he was referring to. "About the fact that you haven't set foot in a church in months, except when it's absolutely unavoidable, about how you change the subject whenever your parents mention anything related to faith, about how you completely stopped praying before meals, or reading your Bible, or singing those songs you loved so much. Sara kept her eyes fixed on the plate. "I'm tired, Raphael. The work is demanding a lot from me." "Sara, look at me," he urged, his voice gentle but firm. Reluctantly, she looked up. "I've known you for 9 years, married to you for 7. I know when it's just tiredness and when it's something deeper. I'm not judging you. I just want to understand. I want to help." "There's nothing to understand," Sara replied, standing up abruptly. "And there's nothing you can do to help." The words came out harsher than she intended, and she saw the pain in Raphael's eyes. More guilt to add to the battery I was already carrying. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, returning to his seat. I don't know how to explain what's going on." Raphael reached out on the table, touching hers softly. "You don't have to explain everything at once. But Sara, you're disappearing in front of me. The woman I met, in love, full of life and faith, is disappearing a little more every day. And I'm afraid I'll wake up one day and find only an empty shell where my wife used to be." The words hit Sara like a physical punch. That's exactly how it felt. Like an empty shell, an actress playing the role of Sara Mendez without actually inhabiting it. "I'm afraid of that too," he admitted in a barely audible whisper. It was the most honest thing I had said in months. Lunch at his parents' house went on as usual. Pastor Antonio spoke enthusiastically about the morning service, about how the congregation had been touched by the message, about the plans for the youth retreat next month. Dona Concepcion served her traditional Sunday feijoada, insisting that everyone repeat. Sara kept her polite smile, asking questions at the appropriate times, offering comments vague enough not to arouse suspicion. It was a performance that I had perfected. "And how are things going in the church you are attending?" asked Pastor Antonio, looking at Sara and Raphael. Before Sara could come up with another excuse, Raphael replied, "Actually, we haven't been going much lately. Sara's schedules have been complicated and it doesn't feel right for me to go alone." Sara gave her husband a betrayal look. And so we come to the moment when we find Sara at the beginning of our story, watching the sunset through the window of her apartment, feeling empty and lost. The decision she had made. That night was not as dramatic as abandoning her family or publicly renouncing her faith. It was something more intimate, more personal. Sara had decided that for the first time since she could remember, she would stop pretending. Stop reciting prayers you didn't feel. Stop singing praises whose words had lost their meaning. Stop being the Sara of the church, the pastor's daughter, the Christian nurse. She would allow herself to simply be Sara, with all its doubts, anger, disappointment, and confusion, and see where it would take her. What Sara didn't know, as she watched the last lights of day disappear over the horizon, was that her true journey of faith was just beginning. That sometimes one has to lose oneself completely to find a new and unexpected way back home. But that's a story for our next meeting. What will happen to Sara now that she has decided to stop faking a faith she no longer feels? Is there a way back to genuine worship, or will her journey take her away from everything she knew? And how will Raphael react when he realizes the true extent of his wife's spiritual crisis? Don't miss the continuation of this exciting story in the next video, Sara's Cry, Part 2, where we will discover how an unexpected encounter will completely change Sara's perspective on worship, faith, and the true meaning of crying out to the Lord. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like, share it with someone who may be going through a similar crisis, and activate the bell to be notified when the second part is published. Until the next video, and remember, even in the darkest nights of the soul, dawn always comes.